All right, back to musky fishing lures or musky fishing 101. Um, it's hard to come up with a title of a video specifically for this that's not already been used. Um, so hopefully one of the titles from one of my videos attracts your attention to this channel, and then you can go through with the different titles. I'm not using hashtags or anything like that to differentiate myself from other videos. The last video I did was on rear prop style lures. This video is going to be approximately that same amount of time. We're going to try to cover multiple different aspects for the differences between jerk baits and glide baits. The reason why they're designed and cut out the way that they are, the weighting materials or the buoyancy weighting styles, some box store compared to custom made ones, and some of the hardware that goes into them. Now, there is a difference between a jerk bait and a glide bait. In order for a jerk bait to work, it has to be used with your action of your reeling and the action of your rod tip. A lot of the jerk baits are very light and have blunt noses, so in order for them to travel through the water, they need that force from the line to actually pull them. And the design, they don't go very far. And in order to get the action out of them, you have to constantly be slapping that slack out of your line to get the lure to travel in its designed function. This is a box store version right here that you can notice that it is a hollow plastic with some very molded, small molded fins into the back. It does not sink very fast. It's enough to run 2 to 3 feet underneath the water. It has two flat surfaces, both on the nose and on the chin of the lure, and it is fairly blunt. So it's like a wedge, a wooden wedge. If you're trying to split a piece of wood, that's the shape of the head. This is a jerkbait. There's not enough weight there to carry it that once it's in motion in the water to actually keep going. So this is a jerkbait. This is something very, very common that you're going to find at many box stores, even like Walmart or anything like that. Now on all the lures, I might say that they're less than desirable, but that does not mean that people have not caught fish on them. Okay. This very specific lure, if you look at the other side, it's missing the eye. Okay. This very specific lure was used for 7 days straight from 6 in the morning until about 9 o'clock at night underneath a dam on a river system for 7 days straight, with this lure the only thing being used. And in those 7 days, it caught 48 muskies. This lure. Okay, so they do have their place. Very cheap. They'll take a lot of, a fair amount of abuse. If you're a beginner, this is a very good river system type lure. But again, you are doing a lot of work and covering a small area, because wherever this lands in the water between you and the lure and you're jerking it, you're only covering about a 3 to 4 foot wide area between point A and point B. This one does not have rattles in it. So there is nothing here that's going to spark a strike from a muskie or northern pike other than just its presence within the water. The movement and that dead stick, or what they call that death pause, or when this lure comes to a stop, and the fish will usually eat this. This is approximately 6 inches long. A very, very popular lure. Now in comparison, I'm going to go to a more higher production custom lure in the Warlock. So if you guys can see the shape difference and profile difference in these two lures. My fingers out of the way. Now look at the frontal area between the two lures. Okay, again, this one here is a Warlock compared to the box store variation. Notice that the Warlock has a much larger tail, so there's more surface area there for up and down movement or for tunability, where the box store one is not very tunable. Okay, the blades are formed right into the hard plastic. On this box store version, you can see where this white piece of tape there, that is for visual, so that the fisherman can actually see the front of the lure. All right. Another reason why they push this piece of tape here is because this is a two-piece plastic lure, which means there's a seam that runs from front to back. And on these lures, a lot of times, if they run into any kind of structure, if they impact this area, it cracks that plastic right at the seam. So they literally just put a piece of tape over it, so that if that does crack, the tape seals it. This one here does have enough cracks around it that has separated from the screw eye, and it gets water into the front cavity and becomes nose heavy. That's why this bait has been retired. But 48 muskies in 7 days, okay, did it get its money's worth? Yeah. For a collector, not so much, right? The Warlocks, which are solid basswood, again, no rattles in them. They are just a visual presentation to a fish, and they're usually struck on the death pause. But because of the profile of the nose and the thinner profile of the body, the thinner profile of the tail, and the thin, longer blade, this is more of the transition between a jerkbait and a glide bait. Because they're made out of solid wood and they're weighted, when these are going in the column of water, they will go a much greater distance than the light plastic variation of almost the exact same size. Those subtle differences in shape of the nose, it's more of a point, and the thinner profile. On a retrieve, this is going to cover, instead of that 3 or 4 feet, this might cover anywhere from 6 to 10 feet wide, okay, depending on the body of the water and the heaviness of the water, the water clarity and quality. A jerk on this lure will travel 6 to 10 feet if you allow it to just go in a straight line before you do the next action on it. So it comes to a death pause, say like 10 feet, then you rip it the other way. Again, if you let it go 6 to 10 feet, death pause, the other way. That is a transition between a jerkbait and a glide bait. Now, I'm going to keep that out just for another comparison. The length and the height profile of the lure, you can see that this one is now drastically different. The nose is much more blunt. It's a shorter variation. This one is also made out of basswood, but just the differences in shape restrict this from going as far as the Warlock. This one here is a jerkbait. It is not a glide bait. Even though the weight is there, the shape of this lure does not allow it to transfer through the water as easily, even with the larger tail. Okay? So little subtle differences in shape, the material that the lure is made out of, the buoyancy of whatever the builder or the engineer that did it. It's designed to run in that water column anywhere from 2 to 5 to 6 feet. Now, here's one of my personal ones. This is mimicking some of the prey fish that's common in the waters around me. So we have a lot of white bass. So this is designed to mimic a white bass. And I do different color eyes on these, just for the simple fact that it's just a difference. So when you turn one way, if the fish don't like that color and it goes the other way, they're getting exposed to that color. That's the only difference between it. These are, again, poured epoxy 3-dimensional eyes that are sunken into the cavity. and then also the epoxy body has been layered to give it a three-dimensional look on it. Again, no rattles inside of this, and there's no stabilizing tail, but in float test, this lure will drop down to about 3 feet, and it'll stay at that buoyancy level or close to that. Again, more of a pointed nose, but it is wider. The nose and everything is not thinned out, so this is going to be that transition between a jerkbait and a glide bait. Because there's no tail, it will also change elevation within the water also. So instead of just side to side movement, each whip of the line or each retrieve of the pole, this action is going to be unpredictable. It could go up, down, left, right, mimicking a injured or a bait fish in distress. Now I'm going to bring up another shorter version. Again, same thing, mimicking a sunfish. Very thin profile to the head, but it has not been narrowed. It is a shorter version, 5-inch, with a longer adjustable tail, fairly stable. So this again is kind of that transition between a jerkbait and a glide bait. It will not glide as far, so this is going to be restricted at 5 to 7 feet before it becomes to the death pause. And it's only going to cover that 5 to 7 feet left and right as you're working it in the water. It is a little bit heavier, so this one runs at about 5 to 7 feet in the water column instead of closer to the surface. Now this one here is a little bit different. Obviously it has the narrower body profile, kind of like the box store version. About the same length. But this one is considerably heavier than this one. This is 4 ounces. This is like 2 to 2.5 ounces. You notice the nose is a very sharp point, and the profile also on the sides is also to a point. So this one will travel much farther on the jerk than a jerkbait. This will be the smaller variation of a glide bait. It's about as short as you can get for a musky glide bait. Now for a medium size glide bait. Now I'm going to be transitioning from lures that travel at 5 or 6 feet or up to 10 feet to lures that will travel 12 to 16 feet in the water column with each stroke of your retrieve. Again, you notice that very sharp profile to the head design, both from the top and the bottom profile, and also the side profile. It is a much more gradual transition back to the tail, and this one here weighs 4 ounces. So this lure mimicking either a smallmouth bass or a variation of that. This will travel 12 to 16 feet as a glide bait, and it will run in that 4 to 7 foot column of water. Right. The next 3 I have to show you are all glide baits, extreme examples of glide baits. These lures are designed to mimic small natural prey fish within the waters that are around here. Which one should I start with? I'm going to start with this one. This is a juvenile musky. Okay, so overall length of this is 10 inches. So this is going to be something that mimics a 3 or 4 month old fish that has been released in that area. Okay, it still has the spots, hasn't really, gotten its natural, well, that is its natural color as a seedling. Adjustable tail, Now this is not a rise and dive. All right, so you guys will see this tail style on rise and dives also, like Suics and stuff like that. This one is designed so if as you get closer to the boat and you upstick the lure or upstick your rod, it will cause the lure to come up like it's mimicking, like it's doing a strike at the surface of the water, but then the tail causes it to turn and run down in the water column. So you can control the depth of this lure, whether you toss it out and just let it sink to its natural buoyancy level, which is about 4 feet. And then you can also control where in the water column it runs by how fast you flick the rod. The side-to-side motion on this is going to be dictated by the length and the style of leader that you use. The longer the leader and the lighter, so you're using fluorocarbon, is going to give you a more subtle curve to the action. Where if you're using a shorter leader, possibly a wire leader, it's going to give it a lot sharper turns, but the weight and the design of this profile is going to allow that lure to carry in that direction. So to the point where you can actually get these if you're using, say, like a 4-inch wire leader, say a titanium leader. You can get this lure to actually turn enough that it'll actually run backwards and away from you. And that way you can get a fish or get the lure into the fish's face. Say you know exactly where they are in the area that they are, and say maybe there's a boulder right in the middle of it. You can work one side, and when you get to that front of that boulder, you can crack it really nice, one real hard snap. It'll cause the lure to actually run and turn and run away from you for that initial snap past the boulder. And then start doing a jerk again on that side. So if you're working around stumps or boulders, like I said, this lure is designed to be able to control it with your rod. You can fine tune it. If you want to run at that constant 4 foot, you just straighten out this tail. If you want it to do that rise up and glide down and turn, that's the design that's behind this one. This is a single color shift paint with the black reduced water water-based paints. If you dilute it enough, the paint actually becomes somewhat transparent, so you can actually see through the black dots into the foil base that's behind it. And then also the green of this foil is also a diluted color shift water-based paint. The eyes are 3-dimensional, painted on eyes with layers of epoxy on them to make them 3-dimensional. It is not a water-through design. This is a solid piece of wood. This is cedar with multiple different placements of lead in here during the sink test to get this lure to float horizontal within a water column and carry that weight through for a glide for as long as it possibly can. The next variation of that style lure is the pike. Now, almost identical to the last lure as far as the nose shape, it's just more rounded from side to side, but it still has that sharper nose, mimicking more of a natural northern pike. It has that flat snout when it's in the water. On this one here, it still has that metal tab, adjustable tab, but I used a shorter tab, where I actually sunk it in more into the wood. So the adjustability is not as much as, say, like the Warlock. You guys can see how much more water surface area there is on a Warlock tail compared to this one. But I added some Polysol fin onto the back. So even a subtle adjustment of that metal tab, it is transferred over a lot stronger into the flexible Polysol, and it mimics the rear fin of a northern pike. The advantages to this design is, again, you can get it to where it'll actually go up and down in a water column, but it's going to be a lot more subtle. So instead of just being a nice long arc, you can really twist that angle on there, and it'll be a sharp turn, but then it'll level off. So it's going to be more of a strong ramp style to it, and then it'll slowly round off the action over the top. So if again you're working the back side of, say, a log or a down tree that's running horizontal in front of you, you can use this bait, walk it up to that point, get it to where it goes over the log and carries over the top towards you. And also having that side to side action. Again, your leader length and material is going to dictate the sharpness of the turns left and right on this lure. This lure, more of the weight is transitioned more towards the center underneath my hand here, the balance weight. So the pivot point within the water, it's going to make sharper turns than one that has the weight that's distributed more throughout the belly of the lure. Both these are made out of cedar. These both come in at 5.5 ounces. Even though they're still the same weight, those subtle little differences in design change the action of the lures. Now here's the largest or the longest lure that I've made. I take that back. Not the longest lure I've made. The longest single piece lure that I've made for muskie. This is also mimicking a tiger muskie, a fledgling tiger muskie. Now again, since we're talking about jerk baits and glide baits, this is going to be that transition of a jerk bait. Because of the design of the nose, and without being narrowed down, there's a lot of water resistance here, keeping this lure from actually going a long distance. And this only comes in at 4 3/4 ounces. There is no adjusting tab, so this lure, while testing, would sink down to about 2 feet, and that's where it's fairly stable. So it's going to run 2 to 3 feet deep. Obviously, just adding a twister tail onto the back for some added action. But this is going to go a lot shorter distance. So this is only going to cover that 3 to 4 feet of motion in the water before you have to give it another jerk. Right? So just the different variations. This one is also a foil-based lure. So for you guys that are just getting into this, when you seal your wood with a sanding sealer or like a Minwax wood sealer, you add your primer. You can then add foil to the base of the lure, which this one does. I don't know how well you guys are going to be able to see this or not. So that is just literally aluminum foil tape, like you'd find at an automotive shop. You can stick that on there, and you can take the knurling of your tool, like say like a socket wrench or a metal punch. They have the knurling on the handle, and you can walk that right down the lure into that foil, and it'll leave indentations. And you can do that with multiple different devices. It doesn't take very long. And then when you use your water-based paints, now I'm not talking airbrush. I'm talking using hand brush, okay? Most of my lures, 99% of my lures are done by hand. I do have the air compressors and all that stuff, but it just, to get the paint consistent every single time, the cost of some of your wicked paints and stuff like that, if you're trying to do this as a hobby or try to keep your budget down and have all kinds of different colors, getting the cheaper color shift paints, which come in 7 to 10 variations, you can come up pretty much all combinations of colors for the cost of one wicked based paint for an air gun. Okay, but anyway, you do that foil effect, and then if you reduce with water those paints and apply them, they become transparent, and you see the foil through the paint, even though it has that color pigmentation to it. Again, the tails, any of these jig tails, you can get these twister mounting hardware from multiple different places or make your own. I like that because you can just swap them out, change whatever color tail you want onto it, go larger, smaller, whatever you want. The fish does chew them up. It's a lot cheaper to just go to any box store or whatever and get some polysol jig tails. These are Kalen's. Again, hook placement. The difference between having 3 hooks compared to 2 is the amount of time that lure is going to spend in the death pause. Where these glide baits are going to keep moving and moving and moving and moving until they come to a stop, which is not going to be like a stop, like your car at a stop sign. There's no brakes on it. It's going to have a subtle movement. Those kind of lures, I do have 3 hooks on them, especially a head hook. Whereas in a jerk bait, the shorter variations of the jerk bait or the longer variations of the jerk bait, a lot of the times at the death pause, when you're causing the next stroke with your lure, it is turning that lure to where the hooks are now going right into the face of the fish. So they normally come up. See if I can get this right. So if, say this is a glide and it's come to a stop, the fish is either coming this way, and then when you go to jerk it away, it's causing it to T-bone it. And then that's why I put the hooks more centralized and only 2 sets. If you get one that's coming up behind, again, when you go to jerk this out, you can add a 3rd hook back here, but majority of the times on jerk baits and glide baits, or the variation of sharing in between, they normally come up right into the center, either towards the head or towards the center. Very rarely do I get tail sets like I would with the rear prop styles. I've got one more variation here to show you guys. That is also a jerk bait, and you'll be able to tell the difference. I'm going to grab an extreme variation of a jerk bait and a glide bait, so you guys can see the comparisons. Okay, so this is going to be a jerk bait. Blunt, round nose, not narrowed down at all. The top body line does not shrink down very much. The belly drops down and most of the lead is centralized in one hole. There's no flat surface back here that will cause the turn of the lure to be restricted. Now an extreme glide bait, you guys can see the difference in the profiles and the weight. This one, being heavier, is going to glide a lot farther because of the shape, the aerodynamics, if you want to call it that, than this. So this is going to be a jerk bait. A jerk bait, you're not going to get that side-to-side motion that glides from very long distance to the side. It's going to be a very sharp turn and maybe only covering 1 to 2 feet side to side. And because it has no stabilizing fin at the back, the elevation will also change. So it's going to be doing this through the water. So that's a jerk bait. So a comparison between a box store jerk bait and a custom made, handmade jerk bait. The top one being box store, bottom one being a wooden custom. All right. The normally custom lures, especially ones that are made out of wood, will run heavier. You're going to talk to a lot of musky fishermen or guys that go for the larger toothy critters, freshwater toothy critters, and northern pike and that, and they're going to start talking about your line, your braided line poundage. Realizing that your box store hollow plastic stuff that's only 2 or 2.5 ounces, you can get away with running 60-pound braided line. Okay, so you guys are really on a budget, or if you are a multi-species fisherman, whether it be walleye, bass, and occasionally throwing on some equipment to go after muskies. If you know that there's multiple muskies in the area that are less than, say, 45 inches long, um, and you know how to rig them up correctly, 60-pound test will work with something that's only 2 ounces. When you're starting to get into heavier lures, again, I keep dropping stuff down here. When you start getting into the heavier lures, this isn't the heaviest. Which one was? I think this one was. This is the heaviest one, I think. This is very close to 7 ounces. You guys are going to hear of pounders, obviously with soft Medusa type stuff. This is 7 ounces and it's a solid piece of wood. You're going to need at least 80-pound test, if not 100. Right? And your leaders are also going to have to be able to match that weight poundage of the line. 80-pound test line being used on a lower bait like this is going to restrict the distance your line actually goes out into the water, so your cast will be shorter. And the action of that line in the water, of how easy the line actually transfers the water, is also going to affect the action. So the lighter the line is and the lighter the lure is, the more erratic and fast the action is going to be. And the more effort you're going to have to be concentrating on within the retrieve. Whereas in the glide baits that are heavier and will travel a much longer distance, the 80-pound test or 100-pound test line that's on there is not going to affect a lure that's 7 ounces as much as the lighter lure and lighter line. So it's going to be a very calm glide with very little roll into it. And as it starts to turn is the only time it's going to tip over, and it's not going to be a flutter like this. All right, it's going to be a very small tilt, given a much larger profile to the fish that are in front of it, looking up at it. Okay, and then even if the fish is underneath it, when it rolls over, it's giving that wider profile like that, from side to side. It's there, it's gone. It's there, it's gone. It's there, it's gone. If the fish are at the same position in the water column, this is what they're seeing. Much wider profile. Okay, the bait actually gets bigger as it turns. So obviously you're not going to be going after crappies with this style lure, right? This is going to be for your big toothy critters. If you know that there's a big fish in the area, whether you've had a follow or you can mark it and guess what the size is off of your imaging hardware, this is something that you can throw in their face. And if they are earlier in spring through this year is kind of different. Our water temperatures raised up into the 60s and 70s very fast. As a matter of fact, opening weekend, water temperatures in some locations were 70 degrees already here in the state of Wisconsin, even in the Northwoods, which is really odd. Normally they carry through the 60s the whole month of July. So any time from the spawn through the water temperatures reaching a consistent 70 degrees, the faster, smaller lures like this are going to work better in a river system or a clear lake system. Once you start getting a little bit warmer, upper 60s, lower 70s, the smaller jerk baits that will have that transition between a jerk bait and a glide bait, that's where I normally concentrate, because you need something that you can do it really quick, come to a stop and let the bait go to one direction, and then do a little quick and let it come back the other direction. So you're working a couple different actions, whether it be fast or the death pause. Once you start getting into really warm water and the fish are starting to hold down to the bottom of whatever body of water you're in to stay in that cooler temperatures, that's when I start to run the longer, more subtle glide baits, that death pause. The fish don't want to exert a lot of energy because of the oxygen level and the temperature of the water, but they know they can get a really good meal. Okay, so this is like the T-bone steak. It's not your fast food restaurant. To a muskie in that 70 to upper 70 degree temperature water. Um, Anything else I can go with those? Again, your paint schemes are completely up to you. Most guys will say and recommend that you copy something that is the prey fish of that natural body of water. Okay, that's going off of some of the scientific studies that biologists have done of the contents of northern pike and muskies. Whether they catch them and they, or they lose a fish and they do the studies, they're finding out what those fish are actually biting on or actually eating. Majority of those studies came from the extreme western portions of North America where they had major outbreaks of northern pike. And when they opened the contents of their stomach, they found a lot of the 3 to 5 inch prey fish. Minnows, little shiners, that was the main contents with a few small ducks thrown in there. Okay, so a lot of that misconception is coming off of those studies that were released within the last 30 to 50 years. Major musky fishermen, they have covered the globe in large toothy critters, whether it be northern pike in Europe to muskies in multiple different locations across the United States. The James River guys that are fishing Canada, your guides, those guys will tell you something completely different to what the fish actually bite on. In order to know what lures are going to work, you need to understand what the locals are using on that lake and what lures are being thrown into the front of the face of those fish, and if it's high pressured. If you this obviously is a one of a kind lure. There is nothing exactly like it. Okay, this is one of mine. I take this to a body of water that does not have any kind of Cisco in it whatsoever. None. Let's say a river system around here, say Wisconsin River or down by La Crosse in the Mississippi River. This lure is not going to mimic anything precisely what is in those naturally in those bodies of water. But this lure works. Okay, that white and silver, gray black combination, it works just about any place you go. With that being said, another one too is your dirty water type fish. Okay, so any of you guys that are in stained waters, river systems, realize that your bluegills, your carp, is a major population of the water thing. So you're matching the hatch, as they say. Don't be afraid to change in and throw in a little bit of glitter to brighten that up. But that darker color is going to stand out and have a larger profile no matter what body of water you're in. So even though I take this lure to freshwater areas where there are no carp, this lure still gets bit quite often. As far as copying, or let me grab my other warlock here if I can get it. Yeah. Oh, well, I can't. I'm going to use the warlock. Tim does a really good job. Bit and tackle warlock. So Tim does a really good job with the paint jobs on here as far as a production or high mass produced custom lures. I have found that the color doesn't make as much of a difference as the action that you're making them do. When it comes to natural fish like sunfish, say bluegill, crappie, smaller walleye, I avoid going away to those colors for the most part. I do throw them in there, okay, but especially the bluegill and walleye colors, for whatever reason it is, Muskies especially do not like these. Northern pike will hit them, but muskies, I have not caught any muskies on any lures that are mimicking a walleye or a sunfish, whether it be a bluegill or so on and so forth. Not to say they don't work, because obviously this one, I don't know how you guys can see all the bite marks in this one. This one, obviously mimicking a bluegill. It works very well. But I noticed that the color options, oh, it's hanging up way over there. The color options here would be something like a perch. They don't necessarily pull in as much as what I think they would if I choose different colors. Even though that's the natural prey fish in most bodies of water around here, I do less success with the perch and bluegill style of colors compared to other variations. I do very well with, oh, here's another one since we're talking about jerk baits and glide baits. This one here is another variation of a jerk bait. You can notice the profile of this one is much different than the other ones. It has much more of a chin curve to it, and the back is arched with the stabilizing fin. This is this is a hybrid between a rise and dive and a jerk bait, mimicking a bullhead. Okay, so it's going to be having that more of an up and down action, nose down, tail up. So if I'm fishing rock, that is, the bottom structure is rock or larger boulders, the nose down action acts just like a bullhead that is feeding on the bottom and is gently coming up to the top. That's what this one is doing. And it will also go side to side. So it's covering that 1 to 2 feet wide, but it's also covering it up and down. That's why the line tie is on the head. Again, no rattles in it, just like you would with a bullhead. And then this style of lure, I've had good success with on bodies of water that are darker stained river systems. All right. So with that, like I said, this one went a little bit longer at 42 minutes today, but those are the difference between glide baits and jerk baits. The transitions between the two, the kind of the hybrids, like I said, between a rise and dive, glide bait, jerk bait. The difference between box store variations and wooden custom variations. I do not have a glide bait or jerk bait that is made out of foam at the moment to show you guys, but I have made them. As a matter of fact, the first prototype foam bait that I made was actually this shape. This is the master that I made the mold out of, and then I poured the foam into this mold. So this is the master that I finished off, and the foam one, I don't know, I misplaced it. So with that, just making sure I don't have any other ones around here. Let me grab this one real quick, just to show you guys a different variation. I should say these two. Okay, these are going to be more box store plastic. This is a bomber, I believe, a Herky Jerky Junior. These do have the rattles in them. They're much shorter, 3 to 4 inches. Very blunt, flat, with a tapered tail to it. So it will turn on a dime. So it's not going to glide very far side to side. It's going to be a very sharp turn and get a lot of action. This is a jerkbait. So it's going to mimic that small fish and a school of fish that might have broken away. Another variation is the reaction strike, which is a jointed body. You can straight retrieve these to get that side-to-side action, or you can rip them and they'll actually again turn around and run backwards for a moment. This one's just been modified with a paintbrush style tail and a very rough clear coat variation on it with glitter in it. And this lure has been pounded and pounded and pounded, especially around here, with very stained water and a lot of crayfish. A lot of the predator fish around here start to mimic the color, the darker gold, bronze colors. So this is one of those. This is actually the lure I caught my largest northern pike on. So 48-inch northern pike here in central Wisconsin. That's why it's kind of been retired. It's beaten up pretty bad. Again, this is only about 2 to 2.5 ounces. It only run that 1 to 2 foot of water column beneath the surface. The herky jerkies, again, same, that 1 to 2 foot. A lot of action into them with the rattles, where most of your custom lures do not have rattles in them. All right, hopefully that helps you guys out or interests you. The next lure we're going to get into is more of the crankbait designs. Just for a teaser, we'll get into the custom-made crankbaits, whether they're shop, box store variations, or custom ones, and some of the reasons why you design different things into those, whether it be the thin minnow profile like that or the fatter variations. And we'll even get into reviewing, if you guys are into fishing, if you haven't looked up Marlin Baits yet on YouTube, he has been building lures for quite a few years now on YouTube. He does a lot of variations. This is actually one of his earlier variations of the crankbait. So go ahead and check him out if you haven't seen him. And we'll look at the crankbaits next time. So have a good one.